What's up guys, welcome back to Filling You In. Today we're talking about this thing. It's the Microsoft Surface Laptop 4. Now at face value it might not look like much has changed between the Surface Laptop 3 and the Surface Laptop 4, but we don't judge a book by its cover. And the great news is that this year this 13.5-inch model and the 15-inch model can both be outfitted with Intel and AMD CPUs. Well, we're going to explore this thing in its complete entirety. But before we do, if you end up liking today's video, remember to give that like button a tickle, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. It really helps me and it helps the YouTube algorithm know that you like my kind of content. And while you're at it, why don't you head on over to my social channels, both on Twitter and Instagram. It's at PYITV. With that said and done, let's get to it. So the model I've got right here is the iced blue color, which looks super cool, super stylish. There's also aluminium, sandstone, and a matte black effect as well. The perfect aluminium milling all around the outside. It's sleek, super stylish, looks every bit as good as the XPS 13 and the MacBook Air. Might actually look a little bit better than them, at least from an exterior perspective as well. Now the sandstone and matte black versions are quite literally aluminium from head to toe, but the difference with this version, the ice blue one and the platinum one, is the keyboard deck is actually outfitted with an Alcantara finish. Now this might be a bit of a Marmite effect for you. Some of you are going to love it, some of you are going to hate it. For me, I really like it. It makes for a really comfortable typing experience. The one potential complaint that you might have, and it's difficult to know until this thing's been used for a prolonged period of time, months and years, is just how grimy the Alcantara finish might get. If you happen to be a messy eater, then yeah, you might want to opt for the aluminium one, but I say I really like it. I think it's really stylish and it's definitely just a little bit left field. It's something different in a world of laptops that are all increasingly looking exactly the same. Now the actual keyboard on this Alcantara deck is absolutely superb. In fact, I've never really had any complaints of any substance at all with any of the Windows Surface devices, and say this Surface Laptop 4 is absolutely no exception to that rule. I got up to speed almost instantaneously. It's really nicely backlit as well for when you're working in low light conditions, and probably the only minor criticism I can offer this thing of any note, and it will only apply to this Alcantara finish, which obviously because it has slightly less rigidity, you do get a little bit more flex in the keyboard deck, but it feels fine, but it is a little bit noticeable. So if that's going to put you off, definitely err on the side of caution and pick up the aluminium finish all over with either the matte black or that sandstone one. The trackpad on this 13.5-inch device is excellent, both in terms of its accuracy and the satisfaction from a down click perspective. It's reasonably large for a laptop of its size, but I'm left feeling that there's quite a bit of room both at the top end and the bottom end of the trackpad. Maybe, just maybe, Microsoft could have squeezed a few more millimeters out of this thing. The speakers on this thing are Dolby Atmos ready, and the sound in general actually is pretty good for a laptop of this class. Now the port selection on the Surface Laptop 4 is about what we'd expect for thin and lights that are in this real premium space in the market, where they are uber thin and uber light now. So on the left hand side of the device we have ourselves a full-size USB Type A port, which is more than you'll get with say the Dell XPS 13 or the MacBook Air, albeit the HP Spectre can rival it in this territory. It also has a USB-C port. Now it's important to note it is not Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4, and we've also got a headphone jack as well. There's not much to say about the right side of the device, except to say that we have the Windows Surface proprietary connector for charging the device. The port and charging cable remains magnetic, which is good if you happen to live in a hazardous household with dogs and children like I do. No chance your laptop is going to go flying because it'll just pop out nice and easily. Truthfully, honestly, I don't really know why Microsoft couldn't have done away with this and given us USB-C charging. If you happen to be particularly Android users, which almost all Android phones are USB-C now, it means you won't have to charge around multiple charging bricks, which will make your life easier when you're on the road. Now there are two fundamentally different displays we can get with the Surface Laptop 4. There's this one, which is the 13.5-inch version, and there's also a 15-inch version as well if you want that extra screen real estate. The display is super crisp and well oriented for productivity work. It is a 3:2 aspect ratio, which means you get more vertical headroom than a traditional 16:9. Everybody knows I love to bang on about aspect ratios. I love 16:10s and I love 3:2s. They are the future. This one also has 77% of the DCI P3 color gamut covered, which is less than the MacBook Air, but more than the Dell XPS 13 in terms of its nearest competitors. Beyond the size of the laptop, display configurations are actually really simple, so you won't be getting confused in terms of deciding what you want to buy. It is a regular HD, well, not quite regular HD. There's a few extra pixels to make up for the screen resolution, but there are no quad HD, which 4K options available to yourselves. That doesn't really matter, particularly at a 13.5-inch screen size. You're gonna have to sit pretty much centimeters away from the screen if you're ever gonna notice 4K. So you'll be more than happy with the kind of pixel density you pick up. It is a Surface laptop, so obviously it is a touch screen. I think the name kind of implies that. Touch, damn it. There you go. There's no option to spec in or spec out a touch screen. It's not a 2-in-1. There's no option to lie this thing flat, so you're not going to be doing any kind of digital pen work or the like. So some people are a bit of take or leave it when it just comes to traditional clamshell laptops with touch screens. I think it's a nice to have, but it's not the major selling point when you're actually picking the thing up. One area of disappointment, and it's probably the biggest disappointment when it comes to the Surface Laptop 4, which is saying something actually, because this point's actually a bit trivial in the grand scheme of things, is the size of the bezels, which are on the top, the sides, and the bottom, are quite thick and chunky. Now, if the MacBook Air can get away with it, then I guess Microsoft thinking exactly the same thing. But when you compare it to the almost utterly bezel-less model in the Dell XPS 13, any other laptop is starting to look just a little bit dated now. We do have ourselves a 720p webcam, which supports Windows Hello facial recognition. It's probably the best implementation of Windows Hello facial recognition I've actually used on a laptop. I found some others are a bit flaky in terms of whether they choose to pick up on my glorious features. Absolutely no trouble at all with the Surface Laptop 4. It is a webcam though, that's not its primary purpose, so let's take a look and see how that thing actually is.
It's about as poor as we've come to expect from 720p webcams in most laptops these days, and I will continue to complain about the absence of at least a 1080p one. But I guess the minor bit of credit, and it's not much really, is that actually of the 720p webcams, this is one of the better ones I've used at least.
Now let's have a bit of a conversation about the battery life on the Surface Laptop 4. Now this is an area which Microsoft have been really keen to draw attention to, because by all accounts its battery life is excellent. And you know what? It's not bad, but I found this model with the 1185 G7 Intel processor, which is a more power-hungry processor, didn't quite reach the kind of 10, 11 hours that some other outlets have been talking about. I found I got myself about 7.5, 8 hours of solid kind of productivity usage out of the laptop. For the most part, in my use case, that's day-to-day corporate work, working on a remote Citrix virtual desktop. So definitely better than some laptops, but not the best. I expect both the Ryzen and the Intel i5 models, which are the entry models on this, which we'll talk about a bit more in a minute, to probably be much more power efficient than this i7 version. Regardless of the model you've chosen, you get yourself a 47 watt-hour battery in the 13.5-inch model. The box also comes with a 65 watt charging brick, which is thin and light, much like the laptop, so you'll have no complaints lugging it around on your travels, even if, as I said earlier, I do wish they'd made a USB-C charging option. So fan noise on the laptop, when you're just doing casual browsing, writing a Word document or something to that effect, it's utterly silent, you'll have no complaints there. When you do productivity work, let's say like video editing or some sort of casual gaming, the fans definitely ramp up. You can hear them, but I wouldn't say they're overly distracting. In terms of how that translates to temperatures, again, casual browsing, you won't notice any heat off the thing at all. When you ramp it up to productivity work, it does get warm, but I wouldn't say uncomfortably so. The same can't be said when you've got it plugged in. At that point, the laptop really maximizes the power draw available to it, at which point I found myself getting a little bit sweaty, particularly when this thing's obviously on your lap. If it's at a table, yeah, you're not going to be bothered about the heat coming off the thing whatsoever. So as we said at the top of the video, the Surface Laptop 4 is squarely inside the premium laptop camp. This model I've got here is the 13.5-inch version with an i7 1185 G7, 16 gigabytes of RAM, 500 gigabytes of storage as well, and it'll cost you a cool £1,650. So it's definitely not cheap. The range actually starts at a really competitive £999 though, with an AMD 6-core 12-thread CPU, 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage, which is actually a really good deal. Unfortunately, with a 13.5-inch model, you can't scale up the rest of the specs, particularly RAM, with that AMD CPU. If you want to get more RAM, you have to go Intel, which is a bit disappointing, particularly if you have any hope of using the 13.5-inch laptop for more productivity-oriented tasks to maximize those extra cores and those extra threads. Now, it's not the same story with the 15-inch version of the Surface Laptop 4, which starts at £1,300. It gets you an AMD CPU again, but this time 8-core 16-thread model with 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage. And we have all the way through the range is options for both AMD and Intel CPUs, which gives you far more consumer choice in terms of what it is that you're actually after. Key point to keep in mind, regardless of the model you're buying, is if you intend to use this for any kind of casual gaming, you're going to want to orient yourself to the Intel devices. The Intel Iris Xe chipset graphics are vastly superior to the AMD chipset graphics that they offer with their CPUs. And as there is no option for a discrete dedicated graphics card with the Surface Laptop 4 range, you're definitely going to want to gravitate to that Intel CPU. Now let's talk benchmarks, and you know what? They're really impressive. This i7-1185G7 was by far the best performing version of that CPU that I've had in any thin and light Ultrabook to date, where in Cinebench R23, i7-1185G7 outperformed the equivalent CPU in the Dell XPS 13. None of them, though, that being said, can get anywhere near the MacBook Air in terms of its performance capabilities. And proving it was no fluke, we can see exactly the same outcome in Geekbench once again, with a crazy impressive multi-core score, and again, par the course for single core scoring performance. In Puget Bench, which tests real-world productivity scenarios using Adobe Premiere Pro, it got a really respectable score of 236. And I actually used this for running the initial cuts on last week's video, which you can check out above. And actually, I found it didn't really skip a beat. No problem scrubbing through 4K 30 frames per second footage. Its storage speeds, though, were, relatively speaking, disappointing compared with some of its competitors, though. Now, moving into graphics tests, it's much of the same in terms of how this 1185G7 performs compared to similarly spec devices in the premium laptop market. And I've also run this thing in 3D Mark Time Spy, to which I'll confess I don't have a huge amount of data for this application, given I've only just started using it, but it got a pretty impressive score of 1,807, which looks pretty dismal, sure, compared to the discrete 3070 NVIDIA GPU in the Razer Blade 15, but goes to show just how well Intel have done in terms of stepping forward that performance of their integrated graphics with their Iris Xe chipsets. So with that in mind, you're definitely not going to be playing Cyberpunk 2077 with ray tracing enabled, but if you like indie titles, older games, esports titles as well, you won't have any trouble at all. In fact, I benchmarked this playing Overwatch on the lowest settings available, and I got a solid average of 60 frames per second, which is maxing out the 60 Hz refresh rate available on this display. It's verdict time, so what would I do? Well, I really like the Surface Laptop 4. Frankly, I'm in love with the keyboard. The display is super crisp, even if the bezels are a bit on the chunky side. In terms of which model I would get, if you're only going to be using this for casual kind of productivity work, then definitely get the 13.5-inch model with the AMD CPU. It won't steer you wrong at all. If you intend to use this for more powerful productivity work, then you probably want to go for the 15-inch model. But if you do intend to do gaming, make sure you pick up the Intel i7, as I ideally with 16 gigabytes of RAM, regardless of the productivity work you're doing. Next week, I'm taking a look at the Alienware M15R4, so make sure you get subscribed so you don't miss my review of that incredible, and I mean incredible, piece of gaming machinery. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video. Head on over to Instagram and Twitter at PYITV. Let me know about the kind of videos you'd like to see in the future. And until then, I will of course see you in the next video.